Cuando yo escuché por primera vez la historia de Alison en su podcast Ancestral Kitchen, inmediatamente supe que tenía que traerla al podcast y tenía que entrevistarla. Curiosamente, unos días antes, alguna de ustedes me había dejado un comentario en alguno de mis posts pidiéndome que entrevistara a alguien que hubiera tenido una transformación de salud simplemente por seguir un modo de vida ancestral, dejando atrás todo el control, el avergonzamiento, todas esas cosas de la antigua historia que se nos meten también en la salud, y hubiera pasado a un modo de vida más ancestral y hubiera mejorado su salud solo con eso. Y poco después, Alison publicó su historia en el podcast de ella y fue absolutamente el match. O sea, era la historia perfecta. Una historia que pasa desde un daño metabólico impresionante desde los 3 años de vida, que la acompañó durante toda su adolescencia y su juventud, y que ella pensó que solamente el control, la fuerza de voluntad y el castigo al cuerpo y al alma, al cuerpo-alma, eran las maneras de salir de allí. Y durante más de 10 años se castigó a sí misma metiéndose en dietas hipocalóricas, en dietas restrictivas, en veganismo crudo, no comer grasa, cantidad de cosas que ya conocemos, ayunar, etc. Y que lo único que la llevaron fue, sí, a perder peso, y muchísimo de hecho, pero a empeorar todavía más su salud. Y no fue hasta que ya en sus 30, avanzados sus 30, decidió que quería ser madre y se dio cuenta de que así no podía porque llevaba muchos años sin el periodo. No te voy a contar la historia porque esa te la va a contar Alison. Es un episodio muy, muy emotivo. Es muy posible que te toque la fibra, tanto si has vivido esta situación como si no. Estoy segura que te va a tocar porque además Alison es una narradora espectacular y de verdad que te va a llegar profunda su historia. Así que prepárate, ponte cómoda y, repito, prepárate para escuchar una historia que es muy posible que te cambie por dentro hasta el punto de que ahora que estás escuchando esta introducción no seas la misma persona que vas a ser cuando la termines. ¿Cómo cambiar por completo la vida y la salud? Simplemente con soltar el control. En su historia La reunión de la tribu, el autor Charles Eisenstein adelantaba que, en el momento de mayor crisis humana, la tribu se encontraría unos a otros para comenzar la historia del nuevo mundo. El metaverso, el Matrix, nunca ha vivido una crisis siquiera comparable a la que estamos viviendo. Es el momento del derrumbe total y el comienzo del nuevo mundo. Por lo menos, es nuestra responsabilidad comenzarlo. Como el arcano de la torre en tarot, la destrucción no es fácil, pero es necesaria para el nuevo comienzo. ¿Cómo transitar por esta hecatombe juntos, con humildad y compasión, para que esta crisis no sea el fin, sino el principio? Eso es de lo que se trata este podcast. Bienvenida a Viaje a la Nueva Historia, la reunión de la tribu. Te estábamos esperando. Finally, Alison, we are here together after listening to so many of your podcast episodes, which, by the way, everyone needs to listen to. In my followers, many people understand English, speak English. So your podcast is one of the best podcasts I have, is one of my favorites. And after listening to you and listening to your personal story with Ancestral Health, I knew I needed to have you here. And I'm so glad you're here with us today, Alison.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you.
And it's particularly nice for me because you're British and I consider myself, I would say, more than a quarter British. I don't know if I tell you the story. I moved to London when I was 22 and I lived there for 15 years and I totally feel that that's my home. So I really, really like when I have British guests because I feel very connected to you.
Excellent. Well, my voice will be super duper for you then because I've got my very British accent.
Absolutely. You have one of the most beautiful British accents. And the way that you talk and the way that you speak and the way that you narrate is amazing. So people, you are here like you're going to have a treat today listening to Alison, listening to her story. As I said in the introduction, she has an amazing ancestral health history behind her that she's going to tell us today. Many of you have wanted to tell me stories where people have healed without diets, without weight loss programs, without moving more and eating less. All the contrary, probably eating more, moving the way that your body is meant to move, doing the things that your body expects you to do, and that's what heals you. And that's what Alison is here for, and she's gonna be telling us. So let you talk now, Alison, and tell us, please. Let's go back to when you were a teenager back in England, and how was your history back then with health and metabolic problems, and especially how you felt and how you were made to feel when you were going through that as a teenager, because you were very, very young. You started with these problems very young. How was it for you, and how did you feel about that? It's a very powerful story.
Okay. So I don't ever remember a time in my childhood when I was a normal size. And I don't ever kind of remember being the same as everyone else. My earliest memories are of me being the chubby one, the kind of big one, and of being different to everyone else. And that kind of was the theme of the whole of my childhood, really. I ended up starting to put on weight when I was like 3, 4, 5, and then it got worse and worse and worse. And I ended up just before I was 20 carrying a lot of excess weight to how I look now. The English scales went round to 20 stone, which I think is about 280 pounds. And I was probably heavier than that, but I didn't dare get any scales that went any higher to look. So I was overweight, and I was known as the fat girl. I mean, I was just the fat girl. I was the one that everyone kind of knew was fat. In that respect, my childhood was really quite different to a lot of my friends. So I couldn't go and get nice clothes. I had to go and shop in the outsized clothes shop. My mum had to take me there, and we had to buy clothes that were in England size 26, 28, because I was absolutely huge. So I couldn't wear normal clothes. I couldn't wear normal I couldn't look normal. I couldn't blend in to school. You know what it's like when you're a kid? It's all about belonging and fitting in and kind of trying to be cool and express yourself. And I really found it difficult to do those things because it didn't fit in, and I was bullied because it was so big. And I felt really sad because I knew that I wasn't getting the same kind of reaction from people as I wanted. You know, when I looked in the mirror, the girl that looked back at me wasn't how I felt. I didn't feel like the kind of big girl with huge clothes on who had this massive stomach and legs that rubbed together when she walked, and massive arms, and, you know, bags under my eyes, black kind of eyes, and spotty, really, really spotty skin. I looked like that in the mirror, but I didn't feel like that person inside. And of course, people treat you how you look, especially if they don't know you. And so people treated me differently because I was huge. So I was bullied. I found it difficult to just be normal. You know, I would go out with the school. I remember going out with the school once to sing, because I love singing, and someone thinking I was a teacher, and I was about 10, you know, and they thought I was a teacher because I just was so big and dressed so differently to everyone else. And I'd go out shopping and people would shout at me, you know, people would name call me. You know what kids at school can be like. It was isolating, and it was sad because I felt I got so much to give. I have beautiful thoughts. I love colouring, I love singing, I love dancing, I love cooking, I loved being with people, and I was really genial and friendly, and that was not the response I got back. And then all my friends started, going out with boys and having boyfriends and having fun and dressing up. As you get older into your teenage years, they've all got their black dresses on and makeup and their hair really nice, and I just couldn't do any of that. And they were going out and making friends and having boyfriends, and I was just the one sitting in the corner looking after all the coats. And that kind of carried on throughout my teenage years. It was really difficult socially. And then really regarding how the outside world made me feel, I think the doctors and the people who I saw kind of thought there was just something wrong with me and that I needed to pull myself together and sort it out. And I remember my mum and dad didn't really do much to try and figure out what the actual problem was. But they did take me to a dietitian at a local hospital. And I remember the dietitian showed me a picture of the food groups in a kind of a circle, like a pie chart of different food groups: meat, vegetables, dairy, etc. And she said to me, there was a big section, like a quarter of it was vegetables. And she said to me, if you don't eat those vegetables, then your stomach's going to be hungry, because look, there's a space for vegetables. And if you don't eat them, then you're going to be hungry. So no wonder you're going to eat sweets and all this other kind of thing. And I just looked at her and I thought, do you think I'm stupid? Bloody ridiculous, I can't, I think I must have been about 13 or 14.
Oh my God.
I mean, she seriously thought I was going to believe her. And I'd left it thinking, she made absolutely no inroads into anything that were my actual problems at all. Even food-wise, let alone psychologically, in the emotional environment that I was in. She didn't touch those. She didn't even deal with the food stuff properly. And I just felt like people thought I was weak. People thought I was a glutton and I ate too much and I didn't have the restraint that I needed. And I was just weak, really. That's how I think the rest of the world kind of saw me. And I knew that wasn't the case, and yet I didn't know what was going wrong. So yeah, does that explain?
That is absolutely, Alison. That explains exactly. I love that you go so much into the way you that you were made to feel, and also very interesting how you say that you didn't feel like the person that you saw in the mirror. That there was a disassociation between, like I always talk in my podcast, we are the body soul. So the body is a representation of the soul and the mind and the spirit, and the fact that you didn't feel like they belong together. That is very powerful. That is very telling, I would say, that you couldn't identify, or your soul could not identify with its own supposed representation in the material world.
I feel as if I was, during my childhood, when I look back, I was a square peg in a round hole, because I didn't fit at all in my family of origin. And I didn't know that, all I knew was the disconnect, the discord, and my body became an expression of that, that discord, because my mind could not handle it. I live very differently to my family of origin now. I live in a different location. I live my life differently. All my values are very different. And I feel as if my soul and the part of me that may, produce that representation in my body, it just was in a complete panic, because it it did not fit where it was, and it didn't understand that it didn't, and it, because you always think that your family is the way it is because you know no different.
Yes.
But I didn't fit in that environment. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw the girl looking back, and I knew that wasn't me. And yet, at that age, I couldn't do anything about it because I didn't know anything different.
Were you the only one in your family going through these problems, or were you, completely the only one?
I have one sister, and she was kind of like the opposite to me, but not as extreme. I've always kind of had extreme things happen in my life. She went the other way in that she ate not enough, and she wasn't clinically, she didn't have clinical eating disorders, but she strove to have a perfect figure. And so several times during our childhood, she was very, on the underweight side and didn't want to eat. And it's completely opposite now because, we're both in our 40s and she's now struggling with her weight. Whereas I don't really have problems with my weight anymore. It's like we've done a sort of 180. It's quite strange, but it affected my sister as well. But her soul is better at being in that normal environment, and so it didn't go so extreme for her.
She probably felt in a completely different place, because usually people don't judge or make thin people feel like stupid or like weak or anything. It actually quite the contrary, right? Thin people are treated as they're doing something really good for them, even if they're actually not. Like, nobody knows there are people who are thin naturally, and there are a lot of people who are not, but it's praised nonetheless. The same way that putting on weight or obesity is treated as is your fault, is your problem, you don't have any willpower, as if willpower is something that we need for our health. Health happens without willpower. In fact, willpower is what makes us sick in many cases. And so when you talk about that dietitian telling you that ridiculous story about that you have to fill your belly with veggies because otherwise you're going to fill them with sweets, that puts the profession at shame. But it's not like I'm a big friend of allopathic medicine in any way. So that's another example of what it can do. And I wonder if she told you that story just because she thought that you were dumb or something like that. So.
Yeah, I don't know, but it didn't work.
It didn't work, absolutely. So the solutions that they gave you were basically, Alison, you feel like you were not given any solutions from your family or from the professionals that you went to see. Therefore, you kind of like started taking things in your own hands, right? And you started doing a little bit of a trial and error and see what worked. And in your story that I want you to tell, but it really... When you told your story in your podcast, when you tell this story about your teenage self exercising every day in her room, that brings tears to my eyes, because tell us a little bit about those solutions that you started going into and what that spiraled to in years to come.
Yeah, so I really was a child of the 80s, and of course the general health advice in the 80s, if you were overweight, was that fat was the enemy. And it was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. I was born in 75. So by the time, I'd gone through my teenage years, and by the time it was 1990, I was 15. So I was really soaked in the anti-fat kind of way of being. And I got to 20 years old, and I decided that I just couldn't hack being overweight anymore. I saw my 20s stretching ahead of me, and I saw my friends going off and having fun and dressing up and just doing lovely things, and I wanted to do that. So I was like, right, I'm going to do something about this. And I decided that the best way to do it was to cut fat out of my diet. And so I did. I completely overhauled what I was doing. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, but I stopped eating anything with more than 4% fat in it. Wow. So basically out went all the cakes, out went cheese, out went any form of butter or spreadable fat that I was eating, out went crisps, out went oils, out went virtually everything, you know, apart from vegetables, what I could do with grains, and sugar. I didn't give up sugar, which, yeah, I mean, looking back on what I did, okay, so I lost a lot of weight over a period of 2 years. I lost half my body weight doing that.
Wow.
And I, like you said, I exercised in my room because I didn't want anyone to see me exercising because I was so big. And I didn't want anyone to know what I was doing in case I failed. And I used an immense amount of willpower to do what I did over those 2 years.
Yes.
And I restricted myself from, I mean, the only cheese I ate was cottage cheese. I didn't eat any normal foods. You know, you think about any normal meal that you have on the table, there's always something in there, usually, that has more than 4% of fat in, you know, whether it's mashed potato with a bit of butter in, or whether it's a slice of cake, or something that's been fried. What I eat now definitely has more than 4% fat in it.
You think?
And I achieved the thing that I set out to do. But I can see, looking back now, that I did myself a lot of harm doing that. And I would not recommend to anyone that they do it again. And I can see now that there were other ways that I could have approached it. But I was a child of my time, and I was 19 years old. And I didn't know anything else. I didn't know another way. And so I just did what had been kind of presented as society as the way to knock this thing on the head, you know, the way to lose the weight. And I lost the weight, which was incredible, because after a year and a bit, I could wear the clothes that I wanted. I looked different, I felt different, I acted different, people treated me different. My health was different. But then, basically, from that point onwards, I had to maintain this regime that had produced the results for me. And it was an incredible struggle for basically the next decade of watching what I ate and denying myself things that I wanted, because I knew that if I ate them, I would put on weight. And at the beginning, you know, I'd had a couple of years eating a different way. So it wasn't like I was, you know, I had all the stuff in the cupboard and I was kind of waiting to eat it. But, you know, if I went out for a meal, I couldn't eat what the other people were eating. I never ate cheese. I never ate butter. I never used any form of kind of normal fat. I was constantly, you know, I never had ice cream when I never had ice cream. I never had normal food, you know. I'd never have a pie because it had fat in the crust, you know. I just restricted myself, and that became the way I was. It wasn't ever in question. This was the way I ate. And if I went a bit mad, I put on weight. I put on, you know, 1-2 stone. I remember during my first marriage, kind of my weight went up a little bit, and I was like, right, okay, got to cut back now. And I cut back, and my weight went down a bit. And it was kind of like a ever vigilant, watchful seesaw, trying to figure out how I could not put on this weight again. And I think there are consequences to restriction and determination, in that for that decade, whilst I was acting like that, I did myself a lot of harm, mentally and psychologically and emotionally, through literally like tying my hands together, tying my mouth up, stopping myself doing things that my instinct felt that it wanted to do. And that takes an incredible amount of strength.
Yes.
And
especially for such a long time.
It really hardened me, and it stopped me accessing my intuitive self. It stopped me being as feminine as I could have been. and it made me into a mental person, because that control was always there. It stopped me being full. It stopped me flowering. It stopped me being who I could be, because I always needed to have this kind of control.
This is crazy that you say this, Alison, because this is very in line with what we talk about in my podcast and everything, and is how, I mean, the amount of willpower that you had to use to do that for 10 years, I cannot imagine, because that's a very, very long time. Personally, my only experience of doing something so extreme was for 18 months when I was doing bodybuilding, which was like the worst time of my life. And I will not wish that onto any human being. And that was years ago, before I started my ancestral way of living. I can't imagine doing that for 10 years, that level of control, which, again, this is something that our society praises a lot, is self-control, willpower, and all of this masculine. I love that you say that it moved you away from being as feminine as you could be, because this is precisely, like, I get goosebumps. Is this precisely what I say? All of those attributes are very masculine, very young, very testosterone. So they're very pressed in the world today, because anything that is receiving, nurturing, waiting, patience, which is feminine, which is yin, is being seen as weak. At least until now. Now a lot of people are awakening to the fact that we need more of that feminine, especially females. And it's very interesting because, for example, I have an episode where I talk about how PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very, very common amongst women, sometimes is created by these attributes, and not because of anything physical, but because of the attitudes that you put in life.
I have polycystic ovaries.
Yes.
And I was diagnosed with them, I think, when I was about 12. And I had the scan where I saw the little cysts on my ovaries. And I was put on the contraceptive pill. Yes. And I was on the contraceptive pill throughout my entire teenage years.
That was
until I said
as well.
At about like 22, that I said, I'm not taking this pill anymore. And it's really interesting because I don't really have any symptoms of my polycystic ovaries at all now.
Exactly.
And I find it fascinating. I've not heard that before about polycystic ovaries, but I find it fascinating that that state of mind and that kind of pushing and driving, I can understand it could produce an imbalance in female hormones. Yeah. And if there's an imbalance in female hormones, well, what's going to happen? Something's going to go wrong. And yes. Polycystic ovaries is an easy manifestation for the body to produce a route that our society perhaps is pushing us down, because so many people have PCOS now.
Which are amazing to get goals, but they can go totally against you. And the fact that now you don't have any problems, it's quite revealing. You have a very similar story like mine as well, because I was diagnosed at age 13 and then given the pill until forever. And nowadays I don't have any symptoms of anything related to polycystic ovarian syndrome. So those are the things, or those are the solutions that, because you didn't get the solutions, what gets my attention is that because you were not given any solutions, and the solutions that you were trying to get for yourself, you thought they were working just because you were losing weight. But the fact is that you were not addressing the actual problem, the actual feeling, the actual reason that was giving you these problems. Therefore, to maintain that kind of like healthy weight, and I'm opening commas here, you had to go to extremes, as if, like I said before, health is something about health has anything to do with restriction or controlling, as if your body is a stranger that you have to control or keep restrained, when actually your body is always striving to be healthy, to be pain-free, to be vital. And because you didn't address the problem, you were just trying to solve a symptom of the problem, which was just the weight. It could have been anything else. Then the problem continued. And then you went into more extremes, right? Then you started to lose even more and more weight, and you went into raw veganism, or how was your story then?
I was kind of maintaining my weight by staying away from fat. And then I met my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and he was vegetarian at that time. And he had had an incredible health journey too, very different to mine, but he understood what that was like, you know. And together we wanted to be healthier. We wanted to be better versions of ourselves. We wanted to thrive more than we were. So I decided to go vegan, and then I got into the idea of water fasting. So I did a couple of water fasts, and then from there I found the world of raw veganism, and at that point it really appealed to me. It seemed to be a way that I could eat and kind of put myself in a box that then I wouldn't have to worry about all this kind of control, because, well, I'd just be eating more vegan food, wouldn't I? So I wouldn't have to worry so much about not eating this or not eating that, because I'm in a box and it's clear. And I soaked up all the stuff that people say about raw veganism, about the detox, about the energy and the light it gives you. And also I'm really creative in the kitchen. And so if my partner had been considering to do that, he would have just been like eating carrots, you know, crunch, like Bugs Bunny. But I was like, wow, you can get this, and this, and you can make this raw cake, you can do this. And my creativity naturally wanted to get his hands on it. And so together we went raw vegan, and we ate raw vegan for nearly 2 years.
Wow.
When I look back on it, is incredible. We did various different kind of modalities within the raw vegan movement. And for a while, it seemed to be going okay. When I look back at photos of that time, I see how much weight I lost.
Yes.
I really did look quite thin.
Yeah.
But I was still of the mindset of, well, I want to be in this size jeans. I want to be, you know, be able to feel so agile and light. And so I didn't see what was happening to my body. And now when I look back, I can see. And so when we first moved here to Italy together, we ate raw vegan, and we explored that for a while, lots of juicing and smoothies and spiralizing and salads. And like I said, for a while it seemed to go okay. And then two things kind of happened at the same time. As I said, I had polycystic ovaries. So before, when I was losing that weight, I lost my periods. They went all over the place because my body obviously went into emergency. Well, there's some starvation going on. We can't let you have a period.
Exactly.
So my periods were all over the place when I was losing my weight. And then I've been on the pill as well. But then I came off the pill and I didn't really have regular periods. And it wasn't, I never really had a proper period, you know, a natural proper period when I started my cycle as a young girl. And when I started eating raw vegan, my periods went away completely.
Exactly.
So rather than having one period every 3 months that was really painful and horrible and heavy, I just had no periods at all. And I was quite happy. I thought, well, you know, I was always painful periods, bleeding so much that I couldn't go out because it would go all over my clothes, you know. And I just thought, well, okay, I've got periods. And then I read kind of lots of stuff in the raw vegan movement that claims that women don't have periods when they're eating raw vegan because they're so clean. They don't need to detox, and bleeding is a sign of detox. And so actually they are ovulating, but they're not bleeding. So I tried to figure that out, and I was pretty sure that I wasn't ovulating. You know, my temperatures weren't going going. So I was kind of sure that I wasn't ovulating, but still there was that edge of research, you know. And so after, as I said, after about 2 years of eating raw vegan, two things happened. The first one was that I started feeling very weak. Yes. I would not be able to use, I felt like I couldn't use my leg muscles, and I couldn't power myself. And I remember at the end of the day struggling to kind of walk. And at that point in time, I was teaching English in a school in Italy. And I remember trying to teach a class and thinking, I've got to sit down because I can't stand up anymore. And I had to literally like carefully kind of transfer myself to a chair because I felt like my legs weren't working and I couldn't hold my back up. And that started to happen more and more, whereas it hadn't happened at the beginning of eating raw vegan. And then at the same time, I was 36, roughly, and I wanted a child. I thought, you know what? I don't have any periods. I don't have the opportunity to have a child right now, even if all the rest of my life was, you know, was perfect, which it wasn't. And actually, I feel like that we should come back and talk to that, because I think there's a big kind of emotional and kind of how I was living my life way in the diet as well. So my life wasn't perfect, but I knew that I couldn't have a child because I didn't have any periods. So I was like, right, okay, so I want the opportunity to have a child, to feel my body clock ticking. And also I'm not feeling very well. I can't walk properly.
Whoa, how are you going to carry a belly?
Exactly. And it was difficult because it's easy in the raw vegan movement to think, especially I think as women and women who blame themselves for things first. I noticed, compared to my husband, I will always blame myself first. Yes. That's my habit. He will blame someone else. Yeah. I always think it's my fault. And so in the raw vegan world, I remember at the time people saying, oh, it's just detox. It's symptoms of detox. You know, that's why you're tired. That's why you're this. And I think a lot of people in that just push through that and think, I did, think that, oh, well, it's just because you're detoxing. That's why you're tired. Just keep going, it will get better. But the fact that I wanted a child was louder. So I started researching kind of ancestral, historical ways that women had increased and maintained their fertility.
Oh, wow.
And it quickly became clear that the foods that traditional cultures had used to help them be fertile were animal fats.
Yes.
Meat.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I'm not eating those, and I'm not eating any cooked food. Whoa. And I did a course with Alyssa Vitti's school in New York, where the lady who I worked with got me eating, sort of walked me through starting to eat some cooked food again, because she was explaining to me how important these, you know, ancestral foods were for fertility. And I started reading, and I think it was about that time I got Sally Fallon's book Nourishing Traditions, which just opened a whole another world.
Just the Bible.
Exactly. So I started eating, I remember I started with congee, which is cooked rice with seaweed, and then I started to try and bring some animal fats back into my diet. And the two things that I loved the most before going vegan were eggs and salmon. And so I found some eggs and salmon that I was happy with, and I started eating those. And really from there was a gradual, over maybe 6 months, 8 months transition back into eating animal foods, which frankly at times was very, very difficult, because the animal foods that I knew that I needed to eat had fat in them. Yes. And I mean, fat had been my enemy since I was 19. I'd spent, 13, 14 years avoiding fat. And I was absolutely terrified of putting weight on again. I had spent that childhood being the fat girl, being ostracized, being pointed at as different. My life was just had increased and improved dramatically since losing that weight. And I was absolutely terrified I was going to put weight on again. And I know you've talked to me before about the time where I think I talked about it on my podcast, where I tried to eat some cheese.
Yes.
And I remember it so clearly. I was sitting opposite Rob, who's my husband now, in our little flat in Italy, the second flat we were in, and we bought some raw sheep's cheese from a local supplier. And he loved cheese, and that was the thing that he went along on this journey with me. He started eating animal foods as well.
Good.
And he wanted cheese because those were the foods, that was the food that he loved the most.
Mm-hmm.
But he had this cheese, and I just remember having a complete meltdown at this table with this cheese in front of me, trying to eat a piece of cheese because cheese was the enemy. I was just, oh my gosh, I can't eat this. I'm going to be fat. I can't be fat again. And there were many moments like that where I struggled to have faith and trust in the tradition and in my own body. It was challenging.
And how did you, because obviously when you were raw vegan, you were extremely thin. You went from one extreme to the other. And I imagine as you transition into eating animal foods and fats again, you did put back on a little bit of weight, which is healthy and you needed it. But obviously I'm very sure that you were aware of that weight gain. And how did you cope, or how did you feel when you saw that you were putting it on a little bit of weight? Was it a little bit and gradually, or was it for a lot of women, me included, when I came out of bodybuilding, for example, I put on weight a lot over the span of 8 weeks, and I put on, 10 kilos, over a stone in a few weeks. Or was it slowly, or how did you go with that, and how did you not go back to, okay, I'm putting on weight, I need to stop?
Yeah, that's a good question. And first of all, I don't have scales, and I didn't have a set of scales.
Good.
Not actually intentionally at the beginning, just because I've moved around so much and I didn't want to pay money for a set of scales and then drag it from house to house.
Yeah.
So I think that really helped.
Yes, it does.
At the beginning, I was still feeling like I had to restrict. So I didn't go from raw vegan to eating like as much cheese as I wanted. I didn't go from raw vegan to, slathering everything in lard. Do now. I still had to approach it slowly, so I had a bit of cheese and then I would have a bit more. And then I kind of saw gradually that, I was putting on a bit of weight, but I wasn't becoming very overweight. And then my research kind of went deeper and deeper, because at that stage I was like, right, I definitely want to have a child now. Definitely. Now.
Did you get your cycles back?
So what happened was, I'm trying to think how long the period was. I think from when I started with animal fats again, it was about a year until I got pregnant. But what happened was I did further and further research into saturated fat, and I found some research about body temperature.
Yes. And
how if your body temperature is low, then your body's not going to let you have a cycle.
Exactly.
So I started tracking my, the biggest kind of metabolic eating. I started tracking my temperature, and I could see that my temperature was much lower than it should be. And so I started using fat as an experiment to see what would happen to my temperature. And I was more focused on healing my cycle than I was worried about putting on weight. And I didn't put on, like you said for you, I didn't put on a massive amount of weight in once. So that didn't kind of stop me,
Good.
So I continued experimenting with fat, where I would cook a big fatty joint of meat and eat it. And then I would take my temperature later in the day and find that, my body temperature was actually higher.
Yes.
I'd actually affected my temperature through what I ate. And because I didn't put on weight all of a sudden, I put on some weight, but it was just kind of, it feels looking back that it was just filling out where I was bony
Exactly.
before. And at the same time, my life was kind of changing. What I was doing and where I was living was changing. And I kind of went along doing that for, I think, 3 or 4 months, eating kind of, fatty food and checking my temperature. And then, miraculously, one day I'd actually hurt my back and I was in bed, lying down and staring at the ceiling for like a week. In the midst of that, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I started bleeding. And I hadn't had a cycle for 5 years. And then I wasn't sure whether I was just going to have one cycle and then it was going to go away for another year like it used to before, away for 6 months. So I didn't know what was happening, but I was incredibly grateful and amazed that I actually ovulated and I'd had a period. And then I said to my partner, okay, well, let's start trying for a baby. And within 6 weeks, I didn't realise, but I was pregnant. Whoa. So I'd obviously had another cycle. My second cycle came. I got pregnant.
Oh my God.
And so then my diet had completely changed. And then I didn't really know if I was putting on weight, because I was putting on weight anyway, because I was pregnant.
Yes, of course.
So I maintained my weight quite well during my pregnancy. I didn't put on a lot of weight. I didn't really have weight to lose greatly after I gave birth. So I don't feel like I had that kind of explosion that I know other people have had when they go back to it. But it happened kind of gradually and slowly. And I had enough grace to let it happen, mainly because I was more focused on wanting to have a child.
Yes. So in a way, your son healed you even before he was here.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is that you wanted a baby so much that you didn't care about anything else. And so you started to heal from inside. It was that wish of becoming a vessel, of becoming feminine, of becoming nurturing that healed you.
Yeah, amazing. I got goosebumps.
Oh, absolutely. I'm about to cry. I am about to cry, like, for real. Because it's amazing how you said at the beginning that when you were born in your family, you felt like you were a completely outcast, that you didn't belong in that family or in that place. And then your body was a representation of that not fitting. And now that, and all your behaviors, and I know that throughout your career as well, you were a very high achieving woman. You worked for Microsoft. You had the lifestyle, no? You had the car, you had the job, you have, the things that our society prizes. But none of that brought you the happiness, or let's not say even happiness, it didn't make you feel like you belonged, right? That you were who you were meant to be. And then it happens that you get pregnant, you move to Italy, you start eating ancestrally, and you are with your new partner, and then everything starts to flourish on itself, and you didn't even have to care about it anymore.
Yeah, right? Completely.
It's so beautiful and so simple.
I just enjoyed food when I was pregnant. Yes. I didn't restrict myself, but I didn't feel a need to go completely wild either. I just enjoyed food, really.
And then the healing came.
Yeah.
And it's just to touch a little bit, tiny bit about when you were pregnant, did you restrict all those things that doctors tell you that you cannot eat?
No, I didn't.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Alison. That's so important. Yeah. And you gave me the perfect answer. No, that's it. And so that healing is amazing. How old is your son now?
He's 8.
He's 8. So for these past 8 years, how is your healing going? Because I know that you are still, it's a journey, right? How do you feel now? And most importantly, do you identify with the girl you see in the mirror? And how do you feel now internally that reflects in your body?
It's a really interesting question. You're right that it's a journey. It's always a journey. And I feel like I'll be on that journey, you know, while I'm still breathing, I'm always on that journey. My food is completely different now to how it was. And it just works. You know, we went through various different ways of eating when Gable was young because he had digestive problems. And so we did those together as a family, and there was experimentation and there was learning and there was lots of things that developed both Rob and I, as well as helping to heal Gabriel. Whereas now where there's not that restriction in my life like there was when I was younger. I eat meat, I eat vegetables, I eat grains, I eat fat. I do still have health issues, and I think a lot of them are a legacy of how I was and legacy of the journey that was given to me when I was born. You know, before I was born. So at the moment I don't eat much sugar. I ate a lot of sugar when I was young, when I was overweight. That was the thing that I was addicted to more than anything. And I continued to eat that when I lost the weight. And that has kind of left me with an issue of vertigo on my cycle, which I've been working with for maybe 10 years now, with different success, with different things. And for a long time, I cut sugar and all fruit, anything with any sugar in out of my diet, because if I ate it, I noticed over a period of time that I would start getting vertigo on my cycle again. At the moment, I'm working to bring some sweet things back, because I feel like there's something not quite right, not including that flavour in my diet, and I want to be able to bring it back. But I want to do it in a way where I understand what's happening to myself, and I can try to heal myself as a whole. So that's happening slowly. I've had, ever since as a child, I've had issues with sleep, which again, they're an ongoing journey for me. Maintaining enough energy in my liver through the night to not wake me. And that's a big kind of metabolic thing, you know, that we've all spent so many years saying we shouldn't be eating this much, we shouldn't be eating this, we shouldn't be eating often, we should be having, you know, and even more recent trends, we should be fasting, we should be having a smaller eating window, and that works for some people, but it depends on what your situation is, and it doesn't work for me right now where I am.
No.
So I'm kind of working with how I can tweak how I'm eating and when I'm eating to try to support me to sleep better. It's interesting that you say when you look in the mirror, do you identify with that person? And that's a really complicated question. And the first thing that came to my mind is the struggle I've had with going grey. Because I started going grey when I was about 20, and then in the last decade I'm probably 80% grey, and I'm only 46. And that has been challenging because initially I was using henna to dye my hair and not putting any chemicals on myself. So for a while, when I had very short hair, I used to use henna and make it darker. But since I had Gabriel, I wanted to grow my hair back. I used to have a really, really short cut, but I've grown it back now, so I wanted my curls back. And that means my grey shows, and I'm not willing to put henna on it anymore. And it has been challenging to see people much older than me around me all the time with not a grey hair, and I'm kind of got my grey hair. So it's a challenge sometimes to look in the mirror and see how much grey hair I've got. But it doesn't make me want to dye my hair in the slightest. So it's a practice of acceptance for me. And when I look in the mirror now, I see a face that is, how that is joyful,
Mm.
and that kind of reflects back to me all of the different things that I'm grateful for, all the different steps that I made in my life and I have made in my life to try to bring myself satisfaction, happiness and peace.
Mm.
And they've been, you know, they've been really scary. It's really hard to change, whether it's diet or work or family, anything that you want to change. And I see that kind of experience and wisdom in my face, and the joy and the lightness that the results of that have brought me, as well as the experience of the downs and the pains of it. You know, I'm much more connected with myself when I look in the mirror now.
Yes, and it
Whereas
can
as
be
a kid,
seen.
I didn't want to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It can
Well,
be
just
seen.
what I was just going to say, whereas as a kid, I didn't want to look in the mirror. I just didn't want to.
You didn't want to look at, yeah, absolutely. And the change can be seen because I've seen you have pictures of yourself in your website, and it's not just when you were a kid and you were overweight that you looked sadder or sad, but also when you were super skinny, there you didn't look happy either, or enlightened, or I don't know how to describe it, but the face you have now, Alison, is a face of peace. It's of coming to peace. It's something that comes from within, and it's in your eyes, it's in your white hair, it's in your smile, and it's very powerful, Alison. So I don't know. Wow, I have so many questions, but we're approaching the hour now, so we have to put an end. I'm sure that people are going to have a lot of questions, and if you want to know more about Alison, we will definitely bring you back. I mean, if you want, we're not going to force you to answer more questions, because honestly, you have one of the best stories to illustrate what I always teach. And so, yeah, we can always bring you back. But right now, and just to end here, Alison, obviously, as you know, readers and listeners, we have recommendations for books from Alison in the notes of the podcast episode. So go and check those out. Yeah, I always get recommendations for books. But what else? Is there anything else you would like to tell us, or something that you will leave the listeners with if they're listening to you, if they are recognizing themselves in your story? What would you tell them before the end of the interview? If there is anything at all.
I think I'd like to say that I feel like one of the most important and most difficult things to do is to trust yourself. You know, we're always looking outside of us, and society's created beings to look outside of themselves for happiness, for distraction, for support, for needs. And it feels to me that the things that have brought me satisfaction have come from me looking inside of myself. And at the beginning, that might mean going wrong. You know, it might mean eating too much and watching yourself put on weight. It might mean going to another extreme and throwing something away in your life that you wish you hadn't. But we need to allow ourselves to make mistakes and try to be compassionate with ourselves throughout the journey, because trusting ourselves, making those mistakes, finding an equilibrium again, that's how the change happens. That's how we become who we want to be. You know, at the beginning, those changes are huge. They're like big waves. You know, you take one step because you're trying to move away from something, and the consequences are huge. But the more you go on with it, and the more you can trust yourself, the more you learn, and then the line becomes less wavy. You don't need to make as many changes to set yourself back on course again. You just need to make smaller changes. And And each time that happens, there's more peace, there's more satisfaction, there's more learning, and there's more instinct. And I remember thinking at the beginning of more earlier in my journey, well, how do I know what's instinct? How do I know whether this is just kind of part of my habit talking or my addiction talking? And the only way you know is by allowing what you feel to happen and watching yourself and trusting that in the end it will work itself out. It's a long journey and it continues for me, but it's the only way I can live. So
sometimes I feel, Alison, that you're in my head. This is very incredible. It's very incredible also because it's like you are in my head. It's like I don't know if you understand Spanish because you talk Italian, but it feels sometimes like you have listened and read everything I've written and talked about because you get the perfect, like, the topic. You choose the perfect topic, and I'm so. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for saying that. And absolutely, trusting ourselves is the hardest one when you don't know if what is talking is your instinct or your addiction or your trauma. But like Alison says, and is an amazing advice, is let it happen and see. And when you see, then you will see who's talking. Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Un beso. Chao.
Chao.
Gracias por escuchar Viaje a la Nueva Historia, la reunión de la tribu, conmigo, Jimena de la Serna. Este podcast y el 99% de mi contenido te lo ofrezco completamente gratis, dependiendo solamente del apoyo de seguidores como tú. Si quieres apoyar este viaje a llegar lejos, te puedes suscribir a mi canal, a mi blog y podcast en jimenadelaserna.com. Recuerda que toda acción, por pequeña o anónima que parezca, tiene un efecto mariposa inimaginable. Si cada que recibes una pieza de contenido mía que te inspire o ayude, la compartes con una sola persona de tu círculo, estarás pavimentando el camino del viaje al nuevo mundo y la reunión de la tribu será imparable. Gracias por viajar juntos. Nos vemos en el siguiente episodio.